Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel on Parliamentarian Diplomacy or Inter-Parliamentary Diplomacy. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start the panel slowly. Panel's named Inter-Parliamentary Dialogue. I'm going to go by last year's name. They've changed it to Parliamentarian Diplomacy, but I think Inter-Parliamentary Dialogue is a better name for this panel. And last year was actually one of our most active panels where we had really good dialogue, people not talking at each other, but people talking with each other. And as someone who has moderated probably over 100 panels and had heads of state and ministers on his panel, I could say one thing. Having parliamentarians on your panel, especially elected parliamentarians and not appointed ministers, I feel the parliamentarians are always a very good representative of the people. So that type of dialogue is very, very important amongst countries because it creates safety nets at times of turbulence in the relationships when you can have dialogue amongst these elected officials to be able to smooth the ground and prepare the framework for top-level visits, prepare the framework for foreign ministers or defense ministers. So it's a very, very critical part of diplomacy. And now I want to open the floor quickly. I don't want to speak anymore. I want to hand it right over to Akif Çağatay Kılıç. He's the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. Mr. Kılıç, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It was really in that manner last year. It was quite interactive. So after our first round, so I'll just start with something I prepared before. The world has become too globalized, too interdependent, and too interconnected for diplomacy to be left to executive actors alone. The blurring of the lines between domestic and international relations has given more scope to the role of parliaments as actors in the international affairs. With respect to international relations, parliaments are engaged at two levels. First, domestically, through input in decision-making and through oversight over foreign policy by the executive, and secondly, globally, as actors of agents of foreign policy in international forums. It is in this latter area where there is a growing recognition by parliaments of their potential role. This is accomplished through parliamentary diplomacy. Parliamentary diplomacy has no agreed standard definition, and it has been defined in various ways. As procedure, parliamentary diplomacy is the manner or the process by which discussion and decision-making takes place. Therefore, it would not be wrong to define it as the full range of international activities undertaken by parliamentarians in order to increase mutual understanding between countries, to assist each other in improving the control of governments and the representation of a people, and to increase the democratic legitimacy of the intergovernmental institutions. Based on this definition, the actors of parliamentary diplomacy include national parliaments, parliamentarians, political parties, local parliaments, regional and international parliaments. Various activities may fall under parliamentary diplomacy. It may include the institutionalized or informal ways through which national parliaments and their members are engaged in international affairs and foreign policy. It also includes bilateral relations between parliaments, as well as relations between national parliaments and inter-parliamentary organizations. However, multilateral activities and settings are at the core of parliamentary diplomacy. The institutional framework within which multilateral parliamentary diplomacy is mostly exercised is made of the various international parliamentary institutions. Within the various international parliamentary institutions, parliamentarians cooperate in order to adopt decisions, strategies, or programs, which they implement or promote by various means such as persuasion, advocacy, and institutional pressure. Parliamentary diplomacy facilitates a direct interaction between representative bodies which can act on behalf of the people. And I think this is the important part here, because they can straight on, because of their mandate, act on behalf of the people that they're elected by. The combination of these features exerts a powerful synergic effect, encouraging a vigorous exchange of opinions and collective decision-making at international venues. Parliamentary diplomacy predominantly seeks to enhance understanding between countries, to make the government more accountable, to better represent the people, and to increase the democratic legitimacy of intergovernmental institutions. The value of parliamentary diplomacy as part of a country's international relations remains an area in need of further deliberation. It is an important tool in the foreign policy of countries where the legislative and executive branches share responsibility for foreign policy. In addition to this, one of the most important tools of soft power is parliamentary diplomacy. The linkages between parliamentary diplomacy and soft power provide a means by which to advance parliaments and countries' foreign agenda. The link between parliaments and soft power can be understood in two ways. First, a parliament may be used to showcase a country's values, political culture, and achievements alongside other sources of soft power. Second, parliaments in their parliamentary diplomacy may use soft power in their interactions with other legislators across bilateral and multilateral platforms. Consequently, parliamentary diplomacy is gaining in prominence around the world, conduct their own international relations. In complementing traditional diplomatic engagements, parliamentary diplomacy offers a means of building on people-to-people relations and in providing opportunities to resolve differences, where the interparliamentary groups may be able to broach continuous issues outside of formal state negotiations. The main actors of these are speakers, chairpersons, committees, delegations, intergroups, friendship groups, and bilateral interparliamentary forums of international parliamentary institutions. To this end, a representative of our people, we, today have gathered under this platform to meet and exchange views so as to deal with the current global challenges which governments may not be able to prevent or effectively address through their conventional instruments. On this occasion, I would like to emphasize once again that parliamentary diplomacy can provide innovative and problem-solving mechanisms to global crises. And we have seen this week that it is possible through bilateral relations to come together and maybe sit around a table and discuss things looking face to face and eye to eye. We have last year discussed that COVID is hindering us from having face to face contacts and seeing each other in the eye. Maybe now in the future, where we can have these interactions much more because the restrictions are lifted, we can achieve more. And I think we hope that solutions can be reached by talking and diplomacy on any level rather than having weapons or any kind of conflict active on the ground, which we are seeing right now, unfortunately, in the Ukraine with the aggression of Russia. So my hope is that out of this forum maybe we can find a way to deal with our differences by talking to each other. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you for opening comments, Mr. Kulic. And definitely the return of face-to-face diplomacy is, I believe, a much welcomed situation with COVID restrictions being eased. Now I want to hand the floor over to Secretary General of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. Asaf Hacıyev.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey for inviting me for this very important gathering, diplomacy forum. I'm presenting Black Sea region. You know, Black Sea region is becoming last year very important for the world policy. Why? Because huge projects are implemented in this region. For instance, oil pipeline, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, it's already is working since 2003, and recently have been built gas pipeline, TANAP and also TAP, where gas from Caspian Sea is delivered to European and after to the world market, right? Another interest, it is a geographical position of the Black Sea as a bridge between Asia and Europe, and it's also intersection of the important world transportation roads like Silk Way from east to west or Viking Road from north to south. But most important value of the region, it is not energy, it is not geographical position, it is the people who live in this region. 350 million people, right? And they are with different traditions, different culture, different religions, and we have to oblige to bring here peace, prosperity. And here, parliamentary diplomacy is very important, as my colleagues just mentioned that it's important because it's a discussion face to face. Another problem in the region for in our organization, it's 13 countries, 81 MP, and we have 7 conflicts. Particularly, I'd like to underline the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What mean conflicts? Conflicts is the damage to the world economy. Today, the damage to the world economy is estimated more than $500 billion. It's $500 billion. Can you imagine the amount? And from day to day, it's increasing, goes up, right? And as a result of this war, we have refugees. Today in the world, 86 million refugees, and plus 2-3 million from Ukraine, it's close to 90 million. It means that in the world, among of 90 people, there is at least 1 refugee. But if we come to Black Sea region, here is among of 50 people, 1 refugees. In Turkey, among 20 people, 1 refugee. But if you come to Azerbaijan, among of 10 people, there is 1 refugee. And here the activity of parliaments very important because at least it's necessary to prepare legislation for organizing normal life for refugees, right? Because they are people, it's their destiny to be refugee, and so we have to do our best in all country where they are coming should be legislation. And here I think parliamentary diplomacy is very important. You know, I would like to pay your attention to two conceptions. They exist in the world, two conceptions, memory and thinking. What means memory? Memory, it's something what's happened in past, for instance, war. But it doesn't mean that we have to live in past. We have to live with past because we have to keep in our mind the terrible things which was happened in past. But we have to think about future. We have to keep in our mind these terrible things and think about future because at least this is our obligation in front of young generation. We have to pray for them peace, prosperity, because they are young population, they would like to see how it looks like future. But what means thinking? Right? We have to keep in our mind these terrible things and thinking about future. And so these two conceptions, very important, memory and things. And it is working together, memory and things. And in the end of my intervention, last but not least, I'd like to inform you, I was born in Soviet Union. It is a country which doesn't exist anymore. And in that time I thought that the world is huge because it was very difficult to leave country. Because it was regime country, it was difficult. But when my country, Azerbaijan, got independence in 1991, I saw that we live not in huge world. We live in a small world. But when information technology came into our life, I saw that the world is not huge and the world is not small. We live in microscopic world, and our obligation to bring security, stability, peace and prosperity. I wish to all of you peace, stability and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hajia, for your comments. Our next speaker is a former member of the European Parliament and chairman of European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs, Mr. Elmar Brok.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and to this conference, which is partly also, I think, a proof for the value of parliamentary diplomacy. I see it here because I meet so many old friends to have such an exchange, and always I admire René van der Linden was the hero of international connection, and in different political systems. And I might also to see in the last weeks of the war that it's still possible to put telephone calls to Kiev and Moscow in these days and get informations between the lines so far as possible in such a situation which helps for communication. That are lines also in such a moment of crisis governments partly cannot provide because they need to use official lines and relationships with the exceptions of the results of intelligence organizations. But this intelligence organization I do not trust so much all the time. I remember in 1999, on the 10 years anniversary of the fall of the wall, in Germany was a discussion between Gorbachev, Kohl and Bush-Faser. Gorbachev, who was supported by the KGB to come to his office, by Antropov, Bush was a former CIA director. Both of them said, as Timothy Gordon Ash asked them, what is what influence have the intelligence services? And they said blah blah blah blah. And then was Kohl asked, said, look, 80% I could read before the Neue Zürcher Zeitung. The rest was wrong. And therefore, this personal contacts which can develop between parliamentarians is, I think, and plus in such situations. Also when there are certain crises, not just war, it's an importance. And I think it depends on which influence the parliament has in which country, in which system. There are differences, as we know, but overall it's the same, that such contacts have also a certain influence for the executive branch. And on the information way, but also sometimes parliaments can stop budgets, have to ratify agreements and treaties, which gives possibilities. And I think it's an important point too that this is not just this direct contact, parliament to parliament, parliamentarian to parliamentarian, but it could be also cooperation between a parliament and its government. The simplest brutal point is when a government negotiator said, look, I cannot agree with that because my bloody idiotic parliament will not ratify that. It's a wonderful instrument for negotiations, which is partly used. That is also one part of that, I think, where we have to do certain things. And that but is the more possible in countries and more credible, the more Parliament has control rights towards the executive branch. Also there are variations in our systems we have to see. But I believe that what Mr. Arim said in the beginning, that this parliamentary relationship can build a safety net. I think it's an important point we have to see, and therefore I think to have such meetings like here, the meetings all over the day, is an important point for such exchanges. And to the parliamentary democracy belongs also that the official speeches in such conference have not always primary importance. The bilaterals in meetings attached to the conference, happening in such a conference, play an important role, and therefore we should see the role of parliamentarians perhaps with more pride ourselves and more confidence, as we do sometimes. I believe that parliamentarians, despite all our positions, that for sure foreign policy, question of peace and war, is a question of the executive branch. We do not do official negotiations. That have to do governments. But to control them, to have contacts, and all that what I have said before, I think it's an important part of that, and therefore I think it's always important. I took, as member of the European Parliament several times, also a part in membership negotiations. We have always joint committees with the national parliament of a candidate country and the European Parliament, and where we go step by step, controlling the development of the membership negotiations. This, I think, is a very powerful instrument we have to see, and because then really parliamentarians have closely worked together over a longer period of time. The same parliamentarians, then also out of this come sometimes personal friendships, despite all the political differences. And I think that makes our world safer, and therefore we should continue such parliamentary diplomacy as an important matter of politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brock, for your comments, but definitely personal relationships are very, very important in diplomacy. And again, parliamentarians representing the full political spectrum of each of their countries as well. The local concerns being brought to a federal level as well. We saw how important parliamentary members were during a crisis like COVID, or for Ukraine right now, how important their parliamentary and their local leaders are in being able to help bring the basic administration at times of crisis. Now, our next speaker is the head of the EU-Turkish Friendship Group, Raisard Zarnecki.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's not so easy to speak after Elmar Brok, but challenge for me. Firstly, thank you very much indeed for inviting me for this very prestigious Antalya Diplomatic Forum and this very important roundtable with presence of very influential politicians from many countries. Our efforts are in Ukraine. We have probably biggest war in Europe since the World War II, and I'm sure that this time is very good for debate about parliamentary diplomacy, but not less important is concrete humanitarian aid. I am very proud that my country, Poland, helped 1,600,000 refugees from Ukraine, and we are sure that this number will going up. One theoretical remark and one conclusion. Parliamentary diplomacy is an alternative form of diplomacy by which the roles of parliaments are prioritized and instrumentalized through diplomatic means, specifically for the purpose of resolving issues that are within the scope of international relations and foreign affairs. This form of diplomacy devises the possible arrangement ways by extending the political skin in a way to include the exclusive powers and competences that are exercised by the members of the parliaments. Those engagements can be informal or more institutionalist and are materialized through bilateral and multilateral activities. European Parliament, you know, is the community of representatives of 27 now after Brexit countries, countries which has sometimes, rather often, different interests, political and economic interests, but especially now we should find the unity and solidarity. I think the European Parliament should create the pressure for real political playmaker, biggest states, for example, for very strong reaction for this situation in Eastern Europe. I think we can observe the change of attitude to Russia of some important actors in international scene. It's the really good move forward. But I think especially European Parliament has a big role because we can say more often, more open and often that governments about real tragedies in Ukraine. Final conclusion is that European Parliament is important player, especially during conflict, as my colleague said. I prefer rather word war, because international public opinion demands from us, from political class, from politicians, real, soon and adequate answer, political answer for this human tragedy. I think European Parliament can be a useful instrument in this answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I was going to go to Mr. Mustafa Karaday next, but I believe he's not here, so I'm going to continue. I also want to remind everyone that it's Chatham House rules in here, so everything said in here stays in here, and while many of our participants have titles on chairs and on committees, that everyone is talking within their own capacity here, so I want everyone to feel comfortable in sincerely reflecting their views so we can work proactively together to move forward. Now our next guest is General Secretary of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group, İpek Tekdemir. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear moderator. And most of the things I would have contributed have already been said by the esteemed politicians. And I'm here, of course, with my personal capacity and with the volunteer work of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group. So I would like to brief that parliamentary diplomacy, of course, is very vital, and it plays an important role, especially in parliamentary communication. And it has to be also seen in the context of the European Union's external relations. And it is a specific tool that tries to be non-confrontational, and it should be the pluralistic. So what we need to develop more, I would say, communication channels and implementing soft diplomacy and understand better one another. We need to seek ways to bring all stakeholders of a political conflict around the same table. So we have to listen to their concerns and try to build bridges. One example is, I would like to say, is the Jean Monnet dialogue, which can be a useful instrument for conflict resolution. I believe this forum, this Untitled Diplomacy Forum, will create more opportunities for parliamentarians and staffers like me to gather and to foster cooperation and build sustainable value for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Our next guest, European Parliament Turkey Rapporteur Nacho Sanchez Amor. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues. It's a pleasure to see how many friends around this table. But we have been charged to talk about a subject, parliamentary diplomacy. We are parliamentarians, which is very natural to see beautiful things about parliamentary diplomacy. I would like to be a more realpolitik approach and a little bit a devil's advocate. When we talk about parliamentary diplomacy, it's different when we are talking about international interparliamentary bodies. We have among us the Secretary General of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Roberto Montella. The other could be the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And these are parliamentary bodies conducting their own agenda, not the agenda of the national parliaments or governments. I remember, for example, how the OSCE PA was able, in a moment when there were no contact between the governments of Russia and Ukraine, to gather together parliamentarians in Ukraine. I remember the first high-level visit to Turkey after the coup. It was 5 parliamentarians from the OCPA, among them my dear friend Asai Guliev. This is the agenda of the organization, and this is not the agenda of my country, my parliament, or my government. And for me, this is a very useful tool in the international life. When we come to the national parliaments, international activity, I would like to be more nuanced, because sometimes parliamentary diplomacy is only used, as Elmar reminded to us, as a parallel tool to say or do things that you can do as a government, and that could be useful in some way, but in other is easy to use also the parliaments to explore ways, because the parliament could be easily dismissed from the government if they go beyond the scope of this prudent mandate. And for that reason, I think it's different. In national parliamentary diplomacy, in my view, has to be complementary of the government diplomacy. It can't to be in any way an alternative. I think if, for that reason, being parliamentary diplomacy in its nature, it's gathering different parties, government parties and opposition parties. And for that reason, this is not the field to quarrel domestically. This is not the moment you can express your differences. The place for your differences is your parliament. If you have been committed to conduct mission on behalf of the parliament, you are representing the state in a way, even having different nuances. And for that reason, I think we can compare. I think the national parliamentary diplomacy, in my view, has to be limited to reinforce the position of the state previously endorsed or admitted or approved by the Parliament. The European Parliament is quite strange from that point of view because we don't have a government conducting one single foreign policy. We as a Parliament has to control the executive of the European Union, but we can control the governments in the Council that are who define the foreign policy of the European Union. And for that reason, even the European Union Parliament being very active in international diplomacy and activities, we have some restraints because we can ask, for example, to come to the European Parliament the foreign ministry of one country, France or Spain or any other. And even when we call Mr. Borrell, Mr. Borrell has to be considered as Vice President of the Commission. That means dealing with cooperation, dealing with enlargement, but the foreign policy, the hard core of the foreign policy is on the hands of national governments. And for that reason, the European Parliament plays a very delicate and nuanced role when we have to support or endorse the policies of our executive. Thank you for the invitation, colleagues. It's a pleasure to see many, many friends around the table and happy to having the opportunity to participate in Italian Diplomacy Forum.
Thank you, Mr. Amor. I think one of the interesting things I always find about European Parliament is at one time they're trying to obtain a more homogeneous structure amongst member states, but at the same time they want a strategic autonomy going forward as a bloc, as a union as well. So hopefully we'll see how that strategic autonomy works out. It's a word that we often see coming from Mr. Borrell's mouth, but we haven't seen much strategic autonomy yet, but it seems not to be on the agenda.
One remark. The European Parliament is next to the American Congress the only parliament which cannot be dismissed from anybody. Nobody can dismiss the European Parliament.
But the people can. But the people can.
After 5 years. After 5 years. After 5 years. That is an incredible strength.
I was going to go next to Mr. Mustafa Abdul Jamil Kırmolu, but I believe he's not here. Unfortunately, some of our Ukrainian friends that were present here last year, they're not here due to obviously the war that they are experiencing right now. I would have loved to hear their thoughts. I'm going to continue down. Next is former President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, René van der Linden. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My most important experience as more or less 40-year parliamentarian in Europe is that I put myself in the shoes of other countries in the Council of Europe. I learned a lot about culture, history, interest, different positions, and I believe that this is one of the biggest lacks in policy. One of my concerns is that national parliaments becomes more and more inward looking. If you look to the parliaments which I know in, let's say, the European Union and around, less and less members of parliament have a knowledge real knowledge and interest in what's going on in other countries, so that they can take into account, when they take a political position, also the interests of others. My second point is that although the inward-looking mentality brings also fragmentation in the national parliaments. It becomes more and more difficult to have a strong political support for governments. In the Netherlands we need now 5 parties, and in the future even perhaps more. I fully agree that the inter-parliamentary institutions needs to be strengthened. And for that reason, the Council of Europe is important to revalue the significance of the Council of Europe. We started after the Second World War as a tool to avoid clashes, wars in the future. So the Council of Europe has this, the members of the Council of Europe have a double mandate. Don't underestimate the double mandate. The problem is that the leaders, the chairpersons of the foreign affairs committees in the member states, in the 47, perhaps 46 in the future, member states are not members of the Council of Europe. They are also part of the national discussions, and they have not, what Elmar said, extremely important, have personal relationships, create trust, as we discussed at the conference at 12 o'clock, trust, mutual understanding. And for me, the rules of the Council of Europe are still extremely valuable for the future of the European cooperation. Of course, the European Parliament, but I believe that the Council of Europe is not a financial institution, not trade, but really a value institution with the Court of Human Rights, with the Venice Committee and all these instruments. My experience is that we have underestimated the importance of the Council of Europe, and it comes because I don't blame member states, but more and more some people who comes to the Council of Europe needs to have a position. The Council of Europe is not a travel organization. The Council of Europe is a real important political organization. And for that reason, I would like to see parliamentary diplomacy needs also on the right level. And for parliamentary diplomacy, it's important intercultural dialogue, but also interreligious dialogue. When I introduced interreligious dialogue in the Council of Europe, then people said to me, some people from political parties said, no religion in politics. I agree, no religion in politics. But there is a relationship between intercultural dialogue and interreligious dialogue. I am Roman Catholic, practical, and I invited Isa Nuglu, the Secretary General of the Islamic Conference, as the first guest speaker. I believe everybody here and in the national parliaments needs to take into account the importance that we accept, that we respect different religions. So that's my point. Inward looking, we need to bring the best people to the Council of Europe, together with the European Parliament, and with this double mandate. The most important, let's say, failure is what happens today in Ukraine. And I said it at 12 o'clock. Russia didn't respect at all the commitments and obligations which they have accepted when they became member of the Council of Europe. Nevertheless, we had many people invested a lot in personal relationship in Russia. And we said all the time, in Europe we never can have stability without having a good relation with Russia. And I want also to say here, also Europe, and especially also the United States, made a lot of mistakes in the relationship with Russia. It's not, an, let's say, a reason, not a ground to act like Putin have acted. This is, for me, it's really, may I say here, a crime. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Definitely, I think I actually brought this up during the Recoding Diplomacy panel, that if the world maybe reacted differently during the annexation of Crimea, as Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said in his speeches, would we have the conflict that we have on our hands today? And I definitely think if certain parameters and boundaries were drawn back then in 2014 when Crimea was annexed, that most likely we would not be seeing the brutality we're seeing today. Our next speaker, Member of National Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Ramil Hassan.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I'd like to share some point about the parliament diplomacy. Dear Chair, distinguished participants of the round table, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, as a Member of Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan, I'd like to express my profound gratitude to the Chair and organizer for the invitation to the round table on the parliamentary diplomacy. So, I guess that whole people who gathering is here by the invitator desire and of course wish the peace, stability, welfare, whole of the world. But how we can get the tangible result? We need talking about it. That's why, of course, as a Member of Parliament, I'd like to share just my personal opinion about it. Taking into consideration that parliamentary diplomacy is conducted by elected officials rather than by professional diplomats, it is an important tool and a platform for discussion of all kinds of issues regarding various spheres. In this regard, parliamentary diplomacy is considered as a complementing the traditional diplomacy, contributing to promotion of political dialogue and exchange of views at a various level. Traditional scenes as a part of domestic politics, parliamentarians mainly reflect and represent vision of their populations. However, emerging parliamentary diplomacy highlights the role of the parliamentarians as active members of the international relations who are able to translate international policies into the national frameworks and ensure accountability of the government's compliance with the international obligations. This resulted in more and more institutional parliamentary cooperation, example on regional and international level, founded with an aim to address expanding international agenda and its domestic effects. Parliamentary diplomacy, as you know, is a relation between parliaments, of course, who are considered as a direct representative of the people, have now grown to have a very important, significant function. Foreign policy issues are often discussed in plenary session or committee meeting of parliamentaries. Furthermore, parliamentary delegations participate in the work of the parliamentary assemblies of international organizations. Nowadays, relations between the parliaments have become closer. They started cooperation in certain areas and are sharing their experience on various topics. Parliament of Azerbaijan seeks to contribute to the further progress of parliamentary diplomacy, establishment and development of relationship with the parliaments and the international organizations present in the world. I would like to especially note the importance of the establishment of the parliamentary network of the non-aligned movement as an initiative of Azerbaijan. I am confident that initiative to establish a parliamentary network of the non-aligned movement under the presidency of the Republic of Azerbaijan will contribute to strengthening the international prestige and impact of the movement. In the upcoming stage, in terms of taking a common position on issues of common interest to member countries, it is crucial to participate in the work of the parliamentary network of non-aligned movement and partake in the effective cooperation in this context. I'd like to state that Azerbaijan is open to such initiatives. Cooperation between our parliaments is of great importance in terms of achieving our foreign policy goals. The main means of the cooperation is parliamentary diplomacy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your comments. Up next is the deputy from the city of Hakandi of the National Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Tural Ganjaliev.
Thank you, dear Yusuf, dear colleagues. As we are recording diplomacy here in Antalya Diplomacy Forum, we have to find out or figure out where the parliamentary diplomacy fits in the process of the changing of paradigms. As a former diplomat serving at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan and then changing my functions as a result of being elected to the Parliament of Azerbaijan, I think that the diplomacy is not only the residue for the diplomats serving like public servants at the ministries to engage and to get involved with the diplomacy. And that's where we have to mention, to highlight the importance of the parliamentary diplomacy in order to understand where we are moving towards. Because the parliamentary diplomacy is very important in terms of talking to each other and not having concrete frameworks, being free of some actions, and that's why it's also important because we represent the people, our electorate, and it gives us additional value and power in order to function as possibly in the best way. One of the challenges of the parliamentary diplomacy, of course, nowadays that we are facing many challenges in the world currently, and as a member of Parliament of Azerbaijan, I have seen the effectiveness of the parliamentary diplomacy, and especially under the leadership of, for example, the people sitting here around this table, for example, the Mr. Samet Seidov, under whose chairmanship we have been able to act effectively in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, and Mr. Azay Guliev, under his chairmanship, I have seen personally the activities and functions of Azerbaijani parliamentarians, both at the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. So that's stemming from that I have mentioned. I believe in the power of parliamentary diplomacy, and I believe in the power of dialogue in order to resolve the issues that we are facing currently. We need more space, more room for parliamentary diplomacy in order to address all these challenging issues in the difficult times that we are facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is member of Romanian Parliament, Varol Ahmet.
Teşekkür ederim. Sayın başkanlar, bakanlar ve milletvekiller, bu panelde katıldığım için çok onurluyum. Bu diplomasi forumun Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'ne ve Dışişleri Bakanlığı'na çok teşekkürlerini sunuyorum. Ben Romanya Türk Tatar toplum tarafından Romanya'da milletvekiliyim. Romanya Türkiye Dostluk Grubu'nun üyesiyim ve Romanya Azerbaycan Parlamentosu'nun dostluk üyesiyim. Ben Romanya'dan Göstenceliyim. Karadeniz tarafından bütün soydaşların selamını getiriyoruz. Bizler de soydaşlardan sordum, ne öğrenip geleyim bu forumdan. Dedi, bize şimdi lazım, barış olsun. Çünkü zor zamanlar geçiriyor bizim Kırım Tatarlar da Ukrayna tarafında. Bugün Göstence'de belediye ve vali tarafında binlerce soydaşlar çıktı, barış olsun diye. Bu sebeple ben de bugünlerde bu forumda katıldığım için çok sorunlarını öğrendim. Soydaşlar da, arkadaşlar da, vekillerimiz, milletvekillerimiz çok enteresan konular çıkardı. Bu bütün öğrenen şeylerin ben Göstence ve Romanya Parlamentosu'na söyleyeceğim. Neler konuşuldu, neler öğrendiğimiz burada. Ben hepinize teşekkür ediyorum ve barış olsun.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmet. Our next speaker is the Deputy Chairman of the New Azerbaijan Party, Tahir Budakov.
Çox təşəkkür edirəm, cənab sədr. Hörmətli xanımlar, hörmətli cənablar, bugün bu möhtəbər forumda iştirak etməkdən çox məmnunluq duyuruq və təbiidir ki, ilk növbədə Türkiyə dövlətinə, Türkiyə xalqına bu möhtəşəm tədbirin təşkilinə görə və dünyada bugün mövcud olan vəziyyətin yaxşılaşmağa doğru səylərinə görə təşəkkür etmək istərdim. Təbiidir ki, dünən Türkiyə Cumhuriyyətinin Başkanı cənab Rəcəb Tayyip Erdoğanın çıxışı düşünürəm ki, gələcək üçün bütün dövlətlər, bütün xalqlar üçün bir yol xəritəsi kimi ortaya qoyulmuşdur. Və bugün bizim dərmi masada müzakirə etdiyimiz mövzunu da düşünürəm ki, danışmamışdan öncə biz bir suala aydınlıq gətirməliyik. Parlament nədir, diplomatiya nədir? Təbiidir ki, parlament, mən düşünürəm, ilk növbədə xalqın etimad göstərdiyi və xalqın adından danışmaq ixtiyarı verilən insanlardır. Diplomatiya isə bir çox zamanlarda nə isə, bilirsiniz, məşhur söz var ki, danışmaq dil onun üçün verilib ki, öz fikirlərini gizlədəsən. Bəzən diplomatiyada həqiqətlərin gizlədilməsi və bəzən müəyyən maraqların ortaya qoyulması məsələsidir. Və düşünürəm ki, bu zaman bu məsələdə biz bir şeyə aydınlıq gətirməliyik ki, ölkələrdə dünən Türkiyə Cumhurbaşkanının dediyi kimi də ikili standartların biz aradan qaldırılmasına nail olmalıyıq. Və o cümlədən parlamentlər arası münasibətlərdə də düşünürəm ki, ilk növbədə müəyyən bəşəri dəyərlərin ortaya qoyulması və bütün hallarda hansı dövlətin, hansı xalqın, hansı məsələnin aslı olmayaraq bütün dünya birliyinin vahid bir standartlar, vahid prinsiplər əsasında hərəkətinin önəmli olmasını biz önə çəkməliyik. Mən burada düşünürəm ki, bura gəlməmişdən öncə mən bir şəhəri gəzdim Antalyada və mənim 3 yaşında nəvəmin mənə sifarişini yerinə yetirmək üçün düşünürəm ki, biz bu gələcək üçün çox ciddi düşünməliyik və təbiidir ki, bizdən çox asılıdır ki, gələcəkdə bizim övladlarımız, bizim nəvələrimiz nə cür yaşayacaq, hansı dünyanı biz onlara miras qoyub gedəcəyik. Və bu yönümdə mən düşünürəm, hamımız böyük məsuliyyət daşıyırıq və dünyada gedən proseslər həm siyasi münasibətlərdə, həm ictimai münasibətlərdə, eyni zamanda qlobal iqlim dəyişiklikləri prosesində, dünyada baş gedən digər sürən qlobal məsələlər səviyyəsində bütün ictimaiyyətin, bütün insanların mütərəqqi fikirlər, mütərəqqi ideyalar ətrafında birləşməsi çox önəmlidir. Və düşünürəm, bu prosesdə təbiidir ki, parlamentarilər xalqın sözçüsü olaraq ən ön planda olmalıdırlar və bunlar həyatın daha yaxşı, daha hamı üçün əlverişli olması üçün bütün səylərini əsirgəməməlidirlər. Ümumiyyətlə, proseslər gedir, əgər əvvəl düşünürdülər ki, xalqın adından danışmaq yalnız müdrik, artıq yaşa dolmuş insanların bir qazandığı bir belə deyək, dəyərdir. Amma proseslər və Azərbaycanın parlamentin sonuncu parlament seçkiləri də göstərdi ki, yeni bir nəsil yetişir. Dünya düzənində qloballaşma prosesləri böyük təsir göstərir bütün millətlərə, bütün xalqlara və bu zamanda bizim yetişən gənclikdə daha çox bir-birinə yaxın mövqedən çıxış etmə imkanları var və parlamentlərin də cavanlaşması, gəncləşməsi də bu prosesin bir göstəricisidir. və düşünürəm ki, bu zamanda, bu prosesdə bütün parlamentarilər bütün milli maraqları nəzərə almaqla yanaşı, təbiidir ki, qlobal cərəyanları, qlobal prosesləri və qlobal müstəvidə ümumi bəşəri dəyərləri üstün tutmalıdırlar. Təşəkkür edirəm.
Thank you for your comments. Our next guest is Member of Parliament from Azerbaijan and Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Azay Guliev.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear colleagues. First of all, let me thank our host for the great organization of this important forum and for addressing the invitation to the OEC Parliamentary Assembly. It is my honor and privilege to represent here the PA, and of course I have listened to our distinguished colleagues, and I think that there is no too much time to just go far from the issues. So I will be very shortly focused on several points. But before doing that, I would like to say that I am accompanied by the Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. Roberto Mantella, who is attending this meeting. Also, I would like to greet our Turkish host and Mr. Salami Saltanok, who is the head of the Turkish delegation to the OEC Parliamentary Assembly. Yes, of course, the parliamentary diplomacy is very much important, and I would say that it is needed more than ever in the light of the crisis in Ukraine and in the light of the real attempts to undermine the security architecture and the international security order in Europe particularly. What we can do as a parliamentarians, of course, there are many things that we can really combine our common efforts, but the question is how much is it effective, and how much the countries representing the assemblies or other international organizations is ready to do so. Because if you look at the composition of the OECPA, this is the largest state organization after the UN, which embraces 3 different continents as well as the 57 member countries. There are, of course, many things in common, but unfortunately there are also the things that prevents our assembly to be in line sometimes with the international legal norms and principles due to some geopolitical interests or the not enough responsibility shown by the different member countries. What we can do, of course, first of all, as has already been mentioned here, the confidence and trust is very much needed in order to have a parliamentary dialogue or parliamentary diplomacy. This is very important, but of course, if you look at the situation when it comes to the crisis in Ukraine, unfortunately, this time we can't tell very positively about this situation. Also, this is important also to have a feeling of responsibility towards our commitments that we collectively have undertaken. So it is also a very important component, and of course there also to be impartial in implementing our decisions that we have collectively being adopted. And of course at this important meeting I can't let's say skip the situation in Ukraine as OECPA because since the crisis started, OECPA took immediate actions and of course open new dialogue and opportunity for discussion, for debating the situations. And just yesterday we have the extraordinary meeting of standing committee where we discussed what parliamentarians can do more. And tomorrow the president of the OECPA and the Secretary General and the other committee members are going to visit the Polish-Ukrainian or the border in order to get acquainted with the situation of the displaced people. This is really a very challenging issue and a very alarming issue because of the innocent people, civilians are suffering due to the crisis. Another thing that I wanted to share with you that the OECPA delegation, OECPA Bureau is ready and stands ready to organize the dialogue between Ukrainian and the Russian delegations. As soon as possible, we have offered this possibility and we are ready to give venue. It might be in any, let's say, countries that is ready to host that. And I think this type of meetings and gatherings is very much useful in order to elaborate our common efforts in the best interest of the world and in the best interest of providing security and the coexistence of the states that really is lacking now. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Guliev. I want to welcome Mr. Binali Yildirim, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Turkey, served on many levels as a minister, parliamentarian, a veteran of Turkish Parliament, also head of the Council of Elders of the Organization of Turkic States as well. Mr. Yildirim, would you like to address us on the topic of interparliamentary dialogue and its importance?
I just want to understand what is going on later on.
Okay, we're going to save the best for last then. I'm going to come back to you once everyone's done. Then I'm going to continue on. I also want to welcome Mr. Yavuz Selim Kıran, Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey as well. I want to go on right now to our next guest. I'm going to come back to both of you then. I want to welcome Samet Seydiov, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Azerbaijan Parliament.
Thank you very much. Actually, we try to do the same here because not so easy to understand where we are in this very difficult period of time, and especially for parliamentarians. 20 years I'm working at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe together with under the auspices of René van der Linden. He was my president at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And the problem is, I think, that 20 years ago we came to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe because this organization was ready to speak with us. And other international organizations, especially on the parliamentary level, they were ready to speak with us. But now we can see that these organizations are ready to speak about us. That's a major difference which we can see. And that's the core why we can see double standards, why we can see new challenges, why we are not able to understand each other, why, for example, Azerbaijan just recently did their best in order to invite UNESCO mission to Azerbaijan, and after the very, very difficult but very useful negotiations with France, with European Union, with everybody. And tomorrow, European Parliament adopted a very biased decision about Azerbaijan. You know why? Because my friend already mentioned. Because we lost responsibility. And a very good friend of mine, and person who I really very respect, Mr. Elmar Brok, already mentioned about that. That responsibility is a key issue. But sometimes we can see that parliamentary dimension, especially within organizations such as Council of Europe or European Parliament, they are working without this sense of responsibility. I don't know, maybe nobody can change this issue. Maybe, I don't know, that's a really question. But I hope that these kind of discussions within the forum in Antalya will give us a chance, in the right sense of this, to return back to our values, to the values of human rights, international law. Yesterday the President of Turkey, Sayın Recep Tayyip Erdogan, said that if international community in time and properly reacted to Crimea crisis, maybe the war which we can see today wouldn't be happen. But I can add that maybe in time international community and properly reacted to Nagorno-Karabakh annexation, maybe Crimea crisis wouldn't be never happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And I definitely agree with you that if the world had reacted rather than stay silent to what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh and Khojalı, that maybe Crimea wouldn't have happened and many other injustices could have been averted. Now I want to invite our next speaker. He's a member of Turkish Parliament and head of the Turkish delegation at PABSEC, Cemal Öztürk. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to speak Turkish because, as you know, here Turkey and is Antalya. Sözlerime bugün burada sizlerle birlikte olmaktan dolayı duyduğum memnuniyeti ifade ederek başlamak istiyorum. Sizin de bildiğiniz gibi bugünlerde dünya barışı tehlikede. Parlamenter diplomasinin belki de en gerekli olduğu günleri yaşıyoruz. Geçen yıl bu zamanlarda burada yine bu konuyu müzakere etmiştik, hatırlarsanız. Ben de o gün söz almıştım ama parlamenter diplomasinin daha ziyade teorik konularını gündeme getirmiştik. Ama bugünlerde diplomasinin ne kadar gerekli olduğunu hepimiz canlı olarak görüyoruz. Çünkü dünya barışı tehlikede. Çünkü Rusya Federasyonu Ukrayna'ya karşı askeri bir operasyona başladı, bir savaş başlattı. Ve bağımsız bir ülkeyi işgal ediyor. Bunu kabul etmek mümkün değil. Bu savaş bölge ve dünya barışını tehdit etmektedir. İnsanlar ölmektedir, çocuklar ölmektedir, yaşlılar ölmektedir ve biz hepimiz diliyoruz ki bu savaş bir an önce bitmelidir. Türkiye bölgesinde barış, huzur ve esenlik isteyen bir ülkedir. Dolayısıyla bu savaşı bitirmek için de diplomatlarımız, başta Cumhurbaşkanımız olmak üzere diplomatlarımız, Dışişleri Bakanımız son derece samimi şekilde çalışmaktadır. Sizler de bunlara şahitsiniz. Türkiye bu tavrını Irak'ta, Suriye'den, Kafkaslara ve Karadeniz'e, Akdeniz'den Balkanlara kadar her hadisede barış istediğini ve diplomasinin önemini daima göstermiş bir ülkedir. Karadeniz'in kuzeyindeki krizde de her ikisini de dost olarak gördüğümüz Ukrayna ve Rusya'ya aralarındaki sorunları diyalog yoluyla çözmeleri çağrısında bulunduk, bu telkini yaptık ve bu konuda arabuluculuk teklifi dahil gösterdiğimiz samimi gayretin şahidi bütün dünyadır. Sizler de buna şahitsiniz. Bu süreçte barış ve istikrarının temini için çok yönlü diplomatik girişimlerimiz kesintisiz sürdürüldü ve sürdürülmeye devam ediyor. Ama maalesef biliyorsunuz savaş hala devam ediyor ve hepimiz böyle bir tablonun ortaya çıkmasından dolayı üzgünüz. Biz Türkiye olarak Ukrayna'nın egemenliğine, siyasi birliğine ve toprak bütünlüğüne saygı gösterilmesinden yanayız. Rusya'nın Ukrayna topraklarına yönelik saldırısını kabul edilemez görüyor, Ukrayna yönetiminin ve halkının verdiği mücadeleyi takdir ediyoruz. Dolayısıyla ben sözlerime son verirken Türkiye'nin Birleşmiş Milletler, NATO ve Avrupa Birliği başta olmak üzere içinde yer aldığı kurumlar ve ittifaklar çerçevesindeki sorumluluklarını bugüne kadar yerine getirdiğini ve bundan sonra da yerine getireceğini ifade ediyor. Kendi milli çıkarlarımızdan elbette taviz vermeyeceğiz ama bölgesel ve küresel dengeleri de ihmal etmeyeceğimizi bir daha vurgulayarak bu çalışmaların bölgesel barışa, dünya barışına ve ülkelerimize, insanlığa hayırlı olması dileklerimle tekrar hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
Thank you, Mr. Öztürk, for your remarks. Now, interparliamentary diplomacy is a very important part of foreign policy, and a deputy foreign minister could probably see the value of these parliamentarians together. And as the host of this event, being part of the Turkish Foreign Ministry, I'm hoping that I know Deputy Foreign Minister Kıran likes to be an observer and watch, but I'm hoping that we can hear how he benefits from this valuable exchange amongst parliamentarians from different countries.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. It's always an honor to host that kind of valuable parliamentarians from all over the world. The scope and the nature of diplomacy is changing every day, so that's why we have been including parliamentary diplomacy as a very crucial part of Antalya Diplomacy Forum. That's why we appreciate all the parliamentarians that participating and honoring our Antalya Diplomacy Forum, and I would like to thank all the parliamentarians and especially Honorable Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım for His Excellency's presence here, and thank you very much. We appreciate all the parliamentarians that contributing our diplomatic efforts as well. We see all around the world that parliamentarians are trying to discuss the issues, the problems of the world, and they are trying to contribute a lot to the solutions. That all the parliamentarians are trying to be part of a solution rather than a problem. So this is very precious and important for us, and we would like to be, we will support all the efforts about parliamentary diplomacy, and thank you thank you to the parliamentarians that participate and honor us today.
Thank you very much for your comments, Deputy Minister Kıran. I'm hoping to give the final word to Mr. Binali Yıldırım. I'm hoping to give the very final word before I close out this session as time has expired. Sir, the floor is yours.
I'm not prepared to participate this kind of
your unpreparedness is probably better than most people being prepared, sir.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to be here with you, and first of all, I would like to congratulate Turkish government and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and made enable to participate distinguished guests all over the world. Timely and important time in Antalya. As you know, we have a lot of conflict around us, and everybody suffering, but we are more suffering than others because we are neighbor to surrounding countries, not only north, but all around, all direction. We have conflict going on in Middle East, Syria, Iraq, and another Libya, Yemen, and now recently in Russia and Ukraine. So we witness and understand that international organization like United Nations is not able to find solution regional and international conflict. This is well understood as we are aware of the form of United Nations just come after Second World War. The terms and conditions at that time is not the same what we have today. 5 permanent members, they have given the right themselves at that time. Nobody approved that. But today we have almost 200 nations. So most recently the Security Council decision is ridiculous. The war in the country inside the war is taking decisions for himself. This is not the way we keep up, we establish the peace. So that's why our president constantly saying that the 5 is bigger than 5. The world is bigger than 5. It is time to reform United Nations. Otherwise, we will face new upset to come. So I think that the parliaments, I remember it was in a couple of years here, Asian, the parliaments, Asian countries parliament association, we gathered here, we discussed more broadly how we can contribute decision makers to do right things. To my thought and opinion, the parliaments should be more and more effective globally to to support decision makers to take right decision. Execution, they decide to do something, and then automatically, some countries a bit different, just approve what has happened. This is not the way to improve peace and stability regionally and globally. So, recent years, the parliamentary diplomacy is becoming more and more important, and we have to use all together, regardless in the region, whether it is west or east or north or south, all around the world. The parliamentary diplomacy should be more and more effective to find solution global conflicts. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the Antalya Diplomacy Forum is a good ground, this kind of discussion and effort, especially Turkey and some other countries, to end this crisis or war, whatever you say, in the Ukraine and Russia should be terminated as soon as possible, because nothing is more valuable than the human life. So innocent kids and peoples were killed for nothing. No one is the winner of the war. The worst peace better than war. So we witness in Azerbaijan, Karabakh, after 30 years' time, they corrected themselves. Agit and other organizations did nothing. It is shame. So we have to open up more opportunity to dialogue rather than fighting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yildirim, for your closing statement. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today to this panel, Inter-Parliamentary Dialogue. It was a pleasure and an honor listening to everyone, and I believe we had some very healthy dialogue, and I hope to see everyone next year at Antalya Diplomacy Forum at this panel, hopefully with even more participation, and it's very good to see it growing year by year, and I'm sure it's going to get even bigger next year. Thank you, everyone.